What is going on, everybody? Welcome back in. It is Dog Talk with your host, Holden. Glad to have you guys here tonight as we are getting ready for a big matchup that's going on this weekend. Man, I cannot be more excited about this football game that we have coming up this weekend. To be honest with you, I think this has so far got to be probably the top game. Top game is definitely one thing. But most definitely, in my opinion at least, the best weekend of college football we've had so far. We've already had a couple of good weekends and a lot of things that have been going on over the last number of weeks, obviously. But this, to me, has lined up to probably be the best weekend of college football that we've had so far this season. It's awesome. It's here. The biggest matchup, at least I believe, of the season for Georgia, something that we've been looking forward to for a year, basically, since the last time we played. This is a huge matchup. I think this is going to lean more the Georgia way than it is the other way as far as how big this matchup is. But, hey, we've got a lot to get to tonight. A lot of news that has come out, obviously, since the last time we talked. We didn't talk to you guys on Sunday because Georgia didn't play a game, and there's not a lot of conversation to have, at least on the Georgia front. So we have a lot of conversation to have on other things that are going on. We talked about the last, I think we said, was we want to find out who are these three opponents. We knew Tuesday was coming, and we're going to find out who our three main opponents are every year, yearly. And then also in that same vein, the 4-year gap also dropped. So we already know our SEC opponents already for the next 4 years. It's already lined up for us. So we're going to be hitting that stuff. Coaching hot seats we're going to be talking about. We got the injury report. Obviously, we're going to be previewing this game against Alabama that's coming up. There's a ton to get to. We've got a lot of other football games we're going to be previewing. We're also going to look back on some games from last week since we weren't on here Sunday. So that'll be some of the other stuff that we kind of run through. Obviously, our score predictions, keys to the game, all of the things that we have got going on. So, hey, if you're here, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, whether it's live or whether it's later, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up button. I would greatly appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel as well. And if you want to know where to get in touch with us as far as socials or what have you go, there's generally a link tree in the description of the show. But you can follow that on any podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and then obviously you can also follow on all the socials. That's on Instagram, Facebook, and as well as X, and it should all be at Dog Talk 20. If you want to follow there, I greatly appreciate it. This is the live call-in show, 844-657-DAWG, D-A-W-G. That is 844-65-7 over TCU 3294. If you guys want to call in. I'm going to be a little bit more careful of how the call-in show works this week because things got a little interesting last week. That's all I'll say on that front. But if you want to call in, go ahead and do that. So let's get into it. News and notes first and foremost. What I want to look at here is the AP Top 25 that dropped this week because I like looking at it. You know, they put it out there. We might as well take a look at it, give our opinions on this, that, or the other, how we feel about them. That's what we're here for. If we're going to talk to you guys about stuff, it's all of our opinions anyways, right? So I want to talk about the AP poll a little bit. Some interesting factors in this. A lot of this has very, very strong potential of changing this weekend based on some of the games that are going to be coming up this weekend. Again, huge game, huge slate of games this coming weekend, and some top teams that are going to be playing some pretty big matchups. So we're going to look at the AP poll real quick before we get to all of the SEC news and all that good stuff. AP poll. So what it lines up in the AP Top 25, Ohio State stays at the number 1 spot. All the way up to number 2 here is Miami. They jump up after the win this weekend, which we're going to talk about coming up here later in the show. Penn State falls 1 spot. LSU 1 spot, 3 and 4. Georgia staying steady there at 5. Oregon at 6. Oklahoma jumps up to 7. Florida State falls a spot to 8. Texas A&M up 1 to 9. Texas down 2 to 10. Indiana up 8 spots to 11. Then we get to the 12 spot. Texas Tech up 5 spots to that 12 spot. Ole Miss staying steady at 13. Iowa State drops a couple spots to 14. Tennessee staying at 15. Georgia Tech up 2 spots to 16. Alabama falls 3 spots to 17, even though they had the bye week. Vanderbilt 18. But moving up a couple spots. Michigan up a couple to 19. Missouri up 3 to 20th. USC up 4 to 21st. Notre Dame up 2 to 22nd. Illinois falls 14 spots to 23 after that Indiana-Illinois game. TCU coming in the top 25 at 24. Also BYU up in that as well at 24. The coaches poll slightly different. They don't have Miami nearly as high. Coaches poll has Miami all the way down at 6th. Even after that, they also have Georgia at 3 and LSU at 4. Seems a little bit more normal to me there. Alabama at 16, pretty much where they are. Trying to see if there was anything other major. Illinois fell a lot. Vandy jumped a lot. Notre Dame, kind of where they are. So that's kind of what the AP top 25 looks like, at least. Again, looking at it, I still, until something happens, and more likely that could happen this weekend. Some of these teams I just still don't see there. Miami, I don't mind being at the second spot. I think they're playing really good right now. They've got a really good team. Offensively, they're clicking on all cylinders. Defensively, they're doing a pretty good job there too as well. So I don't necessarily mind them bumping up to that 2 spot. Penn State, we're going to kind of find out what they are this weekend playing Oregon. So we'll kind of see how some of that matches up. We'll talk more about that later on in the show. So make sure you guys stick around for that. Only thing I don't really like is when teams are stagnant or they're not playing, such as in Alabama and Georgia, that are just sitting still and they move. If shifting 1 or 2 spots, whether it's up or down, that part I don't necessarily matter. But it's when you move 2 and 3 spots and you haven't even played a game, I don't necessarily agree with. Which I think that one. Mainly, I say that for the sake of Alabama, to be honest with you, because they fall 3 spots, and didn't even play. So, don't really understand that. Again, it's AP poll voters, so they're entitled to whatever opinion it is that they want to make in this one. That's just mine. I don't really understand a lot of the reasoning behind that, but it is what it is. Again, this poll's not going to matter here in a couple of weeks. We've got, I don't know how many weeks now. We're kind of scary to think that we're almost at that halfway point of the season already. And when we hit that, we don't have very long before we actually get these college football playoff poll, and that's the one that matters the most. The first one doesn't necessarily matter unless you're, a little bit, I don't know, superstitious, just because of the first team to be ranked first in that first playoff ranking. I'm fairly certain, I could be wrong about this, at least in the 4 poll, it seemed, or the, college football playoff 4 team format. I don't think that the team who was ranked first ever actually won the national championship when that happened. And I don't think that happened last year either in the 12 team. So just something to kind of at least look at there, at least as far as that goes. But hey, all trends have to be broken at some point in time. And speaking of trends that were broken, let's kind of dive into some of this SEC conversation. Obviously, we talked about it last week. We've been talking about it for weeks now, ever since the conversation came up that SEC would be moving to this 9-game schedule and that 3 of those opponents you would be playing yearly. A couple of things just on that. When we're going to run through at least Georgia's, and then we're going to at least look at all the other teams' permanent 3s, because I think that's the most kind of interesting thing as far as this goes, because obviously it doesn't really matter necessarily what we look at like for these next 4 years. We'll run through Georgia's just out of the entertainment of that. But for the other teams, obviously it means in those 4 years, you're going to play everybody in the SEC in that time, and then we're going to have a shift. Basically, every 4 years, you should play everybody. I believe is the way that lined up. And then it's just home and homes are different. And then obviously times and all that part won't necessarily matter. But in those 3 permanent opponents of Georgia's, I got it pulled up for us here. Georgia did pull what we kind of expected coming into this one. Obviously, we knew that we were going to get Auburn. We knew that we were going to get Florida. Those are the 2 biggest rivalries really in the SEC. There's a couple more now as well. Well, I say now, the Egg Bowl has been around for a while, but now you got that Oklahoma and Texas game. Also, that kind of gets added in there. Texas A&M. That's another one that kind of is added in there as well. So we knew that those 2 games, as far as the big rivalry there in Auburn and Florida, more than likely we're going to be there, and they are. The question was always that 3rd one. Is it Kentucky? Is it Tennessee? Is it South Carolina? What's it going to be? And it does turn out to be South Carolina. So we do have South Carolina back on the schedule for at least the next 4 seasons. And I say for at least the next 4, because even though they said that these were permanent opponents, from what I understand, from what I've read, from what I've seen and heard, is that doesn't necessarily mean that it's concrete. That doesn't necessarily mean that just because these 4 teams that you have on these 3 teams that you have for the next 4 years, that doesn't mean that they are necessarily always going to be those 3 teams. That is subject to change. Obviously, if over those 4 years you just dominate a team multiple times, it might be an opportunity for them to look at it and go, okay, we need to change this. Now, for these big rivalries, such as the Iron Bowl, such as the Deep South's oldest rivalry, such as the Cocktail Party, all of these rivalries that are going on, I don't think you're really ever going to see those change. Even in a case, let's take like a Georgia and Tennessee, even though that's not a named rivalry, this is something that Georgia has dominated for the last 9 games. Obviously, now this last one was a very close, really really good football game. But in the case of that having been a name, if that would have been a named rivalry, I don't think that's something that's going to change. Take the Iron Bowl for example. If Alabama won the next 7, I don't think that game will go away just because Alabama has dominated that. Now, that's obviously gone back and forth and been a close game here and there over the last couple of years. But that one's always going to stick. That one's always going to stay. But in case of like the South Carolina situation, that's who we're going to be playing for the next 4 years of those 3 opponents. Well, if Georgia was to dominate that or vice versa, then that might be something that in 4 years will be reevaluated. So, from what I was reading earlier, I want to see if I could get this to pull back up, at least for myself, and kind of read it to you guys, because this is what I kind of was gathering from it. They put a bunch of percentages into kind of how they balance the competitive fairness as far as these games, even over the next 4 years, using these team records from 2021 to 24 is how they've done this. The highest opponent average winning percentage for any school in 26 through 29 is 55.67%, while the lowest is 46.65, a difference of only 9.02%. And then the comparison of that is when they competed in divisional play, obviously what we used to be in, the highest opponent average winning percentage from any school would be from 2020 to 23 was 61.32%, with the lowest being 46.65, a difference of only, or excuse me, the highest was 61.32%, the lowest of which was 39.76%. And that's a difference of 21.56%. So that's kind of how they've been able to try to look at this as a competitive fairness and balance things out for these schedules here over the next 4 years. And then obviously, I think, again, same with kind of those 3 permanents, because that was, again, the biggest question I had was, what's going to happen if you have this where a team is just constantly dominating? And again, named rivalry, something that's been around for a long time. Don't think that's necessarily something you're going to have to worry about. But some of these other ones, that third one, in the case of Georgia, that could be something that changes if that's not really a competitive fairness in that time. But kind of looking at things here, I'm just going to run through this for you guys that are listening, for you guys that are watching that may or may not have heard or seen this yet. These are the matchups for the next 4 years in the SEC. It's going to be pretty simple here. Some of this is kind of interchange where like 1 year you might play a team doesn't necessarily mean you'll play them at home or vice versa the next year. Some of these are kind of gapped up. For example, LSU will play in 27, but we don't play them the next year, and we don't play them in 28. We won't play them again until 29. So it is in there. You'll play those teams, all the teams, over those 4-year spans, but you might have that gap like that where it's not necessarily back-to-back years. So this is what it looks like. Auburn will have it home next year. Florida will be in Atlanta next year, because obviously this will be the last year in Jacksonville, and then next year is we'll play in Atlanta. The year after that, we'll play in Tampa. And then like Georgia Tech, as far as Tech goes, I know I kind of messed this up a little bit. In the first, I think the start of the season, we're playing them in Atlanta, but not, what is it, Bobby Dodd Stadium. We're not playing them there. We're actually playing them in the Benz this year. So I don't really know why they chose that. And then we'll play them at our house next year. But anyways, I digress in that. But here we go. Auburn's at home, Florida's neutral, and then we go to South Carolina next year. And then here's our 3 home games out of that. We'll have Missouri, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma. We'll all be at home. We'll go to Alabama, to Arkansas, to Ole Miss in 26. And then in 27, the 3 mains are swapped. Obviously, we're going to Auburn. Florida will be in Tampa that year. And then we'll have South Carolina at home. And then the 3 home games we'll have that year: LSU, Mississippi State, Tennessee. So oddly, won't see Tennessee in 2026. Kind of strange, obviously, for the last, we have that streak kind of going, and there'll be a gap year in between that before we'll see them again. But that's the home slate of 27, and then the away slate of 27 will be at Kentucky, at Texas A&M, and at Texas. So the first time we'll get to go to Kyle Field in this new structure. So that's kind of an exciting thing. I know that's a conversation that's been happening for a long time. And it's also, the first time in a long time that Alabama has come to play us. Now that's happening this year. But Just another kind of one of those things. Then we move to 28. I'm not going to go through those main three again. Obviously, you can figure that out. The only difference is we'll be back in Jacksonville by the 2028 season, is what they expect. 3 home games that year will be Alabama, Arkansas, Ole Miss. Then we go to Missouri, to Vanderbilt, to Oklahoma. So basically, it kind of looks like, yeah, it lines up. So 26 and 28 will be inverse of each other, and then 27 and 29 will be inverse of each other. So instead of having like Alabama this year and then the next year, well, that's Alabama in 26 and then 27. It's actually going to be 26 and 28. So there's that gap. And I did kind of wonder about this too. I wondered, every so often you get some of these teams, man, it's like they're playing really good, obviously, but you have these moments, you have these opportunities, I guess you would say, where maybe a team is kind of on a roll in that stretch, right? Maybe some of these teams are doing a really good job and they're not very interested in let me just kind of let me get focused back in right here. Maybe a team's doing really good at this point in time. Maybe a team's on a roll for the next 2 years. But then they kind of fall off a little bit. Maybe another team bumps up. So I kind of wondered, like, if you have a team who you just so happen to get that year that's just on fire, but then the next year they're not, and you kind of miss that, you are going to kind of have to play with luck a little bit there. You're going to kind of have to luck up that, hey, maybe this team's not all that great this year, or maybe this team is really good, and your schedule lines up really good for you that year. I think that's maybe why they kind of did the inverse instead of, like, for example, next year playing Alabama and then play them the year after that and then not having them for 2 years. I think that's why they kind of intertwine those like that, where it's like not every year, but every other year that you would play those teams. So at least that, fairly interesting to me. I do, at least, like I said, I want to kind of look at some of these other teams and at least what it is that their 3 core opponents are. So for Alabama, it's Auburn, it's Mississippi State, it's Tennessee. Auburn and Tennessee are those 2 teams that they truly have. They have that rivalry that's been going on for a long time. Obviously, Tennessee is a big one for them. Auburn being the Iron Bowl, which has been around forever. The question I had on this was obviously Mississippi State. I was like, that's curious. I mean, I get the balancing part of that, but I was really, really surprised when that came out to not see LSU. And I think some of that is because if you had Auburn, LSU, and you had Tennessee on there, first of all, that's slightly a competitive disadvantage on Alabama's part, which is kind of hard to say just because of the reign that obviously they've had for the number of years. But not seeing LSU there is kind of strange. But I could also look at that and say, okay, if you had that as their 3 like permanent opponents, I don't know that you would ever actually change anything about it, because those are all 3 incredible rivalries that happen every year. Then we look at Arkansas's LSU, Missouri, Texas. LSU, Missouri seems normal. Texas doesn't, just because, that really hasn't been a rivalry. That's not a game that is really known. So that one's just kind of interesting. I guess we're kind of starting some new rivalries. Auburn's is Vanderbilt, Alabama, Georgia. Again, Alabama, Georgia, normal. Vanderbilt, okay, I think that's just that balancing things out. Florida's will be South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky. Hello, SEC East. That one kind of lines up where it's just kind of normal. The only thing on this one is, again, not seeing that Tennessee game, Tennessee, Florida. That was a pretty fun matchup generally. You won't see that one this year. Kentucky's is Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee. Again, another one of those SEC East kind of components there. LSU's will be Texas A&M, Arkansas, Ole Miss. Not bad on their part. Again, not getting that Alabama pool. Ole Miss is LSU, Mississippi State, Oklahoma. Mississippi State's is Alabama, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss. Vanderbilt, again, just kind of strange, but hey, you got to put a rivalry in there somewhere. Missouri's will be Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Arkansas. Oklahoma's is Texas, Ole Miss, Missouri. South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky, Florida. Again, SEC just East, eat them up. Tennessee's is Alabama, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. That one not so much, fairly normal there. Texas is Arkansas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma. Texas A&M is Texas. LSU, Missouri. Vanderbilt is Tennessee, Auburn, Mississippi State. Again, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, just kind of a strange look there. But that's kind of what that looks like on there. Again, we've just been waiting, kind of trying to wait to get some answers, see if there was anything that came up of this as far as the actual rivalry went and who those teams will be permanent. I didn't really expect. I guess I knew that, hey, they're gonna announce the next 4 years too, so we kind of have all of that information already way ahead of time. Because it doesn't necessarily matter, other than I guess you just know will ahead of time. But we've got them all now. Here they are. The only thing I was curious about is who that third team is going to be. Now we know. So it's lined up there. Anything can change here the number of years when they kind of run through all of those things. So that's what I've got on that as far as the SEC announcements go. We've got our permanents. We've got the next 4 years figured out. Obviously, next year, that's when that 9-game stretch starts. So you got your 3 and then you got your 6. And then I guess the only other thing is, we'll have some of these other crossover kind of match. I can't remember if it's next year or 2027. I think we play FSU. And then I know down the line, too, I think we have a matchup also against Ohio State. So we've got a couple of seasons that are coming up where you're really only going to have 1, maybe 2 games against what we consider to be cupcakes, kind of these work out the kink games, if you will. A lot of that's going to start to kind of dissipate a little bit. The only thing that I am excited about that is I like playing some of the smaller schools because it kind of gives you an opportunity to get guys reps, for lack of a better term. The only downfall to that, I guess you say, I don't really know that there necessarily is a downfall to that, other than it's already a grind. Now we're adding another SEC game to it. It's even more of a grind. And then you have these couple of games where you have big time matchups in a season. Let's just say you had an FSU in there. Well, all of a sudden now there's 10 games right there. So you got 2 games outside of that. And one of those is going to be Georgia Tech every year. So really you have one other game that you might not necessarily play anybody difficult. The good thing about that is you can't complain about a schedule. When it comes to the end of the season, your schedule is what it is. It was hard. Not necessarily easy, but guess what? You got a great strength of schedule. So if you're winning those games, things should be going well for you. I say should. Doesn't necessarily mean that they should, but the potential of that is. So let's see. Some of the other things I want to talk about here, coaching hot seats. A couple of the guys that I wanted to kind of talk about slate that we're going to be looking at, one of which, Mike Gundy, Oklahoma State. He is no longer there after basically 20 years with the program. He was fired earlier this week. So that seat is no longer hot. It's now vacant. Don't really know what the look is going to be there as far as who's going to pick up who, where somebody's going to go, where those shoes are going to get filled. But with this happening, with the first big firing of the season already happening here, coming out of week 4, going into week 5, this is, to me, where you're going to see some of these other bigger schools that are questioning, hey, do we want to keep this guy around? Is it time for a change? This, to me, is when you're going to start seeing those changes happen. And I say that because if you get one name that's out there, all of a sudden, all these other schools are going to go, okay, if the carousel's about to start and we're about to have to start picking, well, I need to get rid of the guy who's sitting here now so I can be ready to get the next guy, the best guy who's going to be out there. Because if I wait around, that best guy might get an offer somewhere else, and he's going to go somewhere else. So on that watch, obviously, is a Florida and Billy Napier. I don't know. It's kind of crazy. It's